Hello. I'm so happy to be here. There's something about coming to Israel that inspires you to be thinking outside the box. And for the last, I would say 15 years, when I made my first trip to Israel to meet and recruit entrepreneurs for a program that we started, I came back and I said, we have to change everything. There is inspiration that I received from how you start and think about being an innovator that is missing in the kinds of things that we talk about in the States. And everybody thinks that things started in Silicon Valley and they've got the answers to everything, and it couldn't be further from the truth. So we began 20 years ago in search of what we call the hidden figures. So those entrepreneurs or entrepreneurial-minded people who didn't have an opportunity to be able to see their dreams come true. And in the process of meeting all kinds of people from various different, whether rural areas or areas where the economy was in terrible trouble, or people right in the middle of the cities that felt that they had everything going for them, what we learned was that there were some people who just did not have access to the resources and support they needed. And we thought, well, what can you do if you're an advocate for entrepreneurs? What can you do? You can help them and be their ambassador. And so we said there are many people that are talking about investing. There are several people that are working one-on-one with entrepreneurs. There are so many academic institutions that are talking to people and saying, here's what you should do to be an entrepreneur. Here's the method that you should follow. And we found that what women were not understanding, or what women were not engaging with, was the fact that it didn't seem comfortable for them the way people were teaching people how to be entrepreneurs. And everyone said, well, there's nothing special about it. You just have to understand your market. You have to make a good product. You have to be capable. I called it the 3 M's, the management, the market, and then the money. And when we got to the money, we realized that the reason why we didn't see a lot of women in the room, and we didn't see a lot of women getting funded, was because they weren't speaking investor. I mean, it's a sort of a silly thing, but it's a language all its own. I remember going to college and taking economics classes and not understanding. It was like a separate foreign language to me. Why can't you say it simply? Why can't you say it in a way that I understand? And so 20 years ago, we met these entrepreneurs, and they said, we are engineers. We spend our time with, in learning, get our graduate degrees in biology, in chemistry, in engineering, in all kinds of sciences, or computer science, or marketing, or business. But we don't know any investors, and we're not getting funded. And we said, well, that's sort of, we can be the bridge. We'll introduce you to the investors. But first we have to teach you how to speak investor, because it's not the language of biology, and it's not the language of computer science. It's a whole different world. And I remember the first time that we said we were going to do this. I remember there were, this was in Silicon Valley, and we were very involved with the Oracle Corporation. And at the time, I was running a federal government commission on entrepreneurship. And we went to California to see what they were doing, as everybody makes that pilgrimage. And we were at the Oracle Conference Center, and we were talking to about 350 women who said they were entrepreneurs, and we realized that none of us understood what it was they were asking for. And we realized right then that the most important thing is to build that bridge, to begin to explain and communicate to people exactly what you're doing so they can understand the opportunity and they can support you. So one of my favorite experiences was there was a company that we met who had, she was an engineer, and she had come up with a way to allow people to, allow the eye to be tricked into seeing more colors on a display screen. And this was 99, 2000 that she started this company, and we said, well, this is exciting. It's a technology, it's innovative. It's probably going to transform things. We don't really understand what it is, but how do we explain that in a simple way? And so we created some graphics, and we showed it to a bunch of Silicon Valley investors, and they said, that's impossible. And we thought, all right, what else does it take to be able to get your idea that is not the norm into, to that person? So we spent a lot of time trying to convince that investor. And what we learned was not everybody gets it. And you don't have to convince everybody or every single person. You just need to find the people that get you, that understand what you're trying to do. And so it's like the old fairy tales of, kissing a lot of frogs for people in order to find your prince, and dating a lot of people in order to figure out which one is going to be the one for you. And not everybody is into you. So with that in mind, we began to try to turn it around and say, okay, here's the entrepreneur. We'll invite a bunch of investors come in, and then we're going to ask you questions about whether or not you are worthy of actually investing in that company. And it threw everybody off, but it gave the entrepreneur the positioning to be able to interview investors for their investment. So the company was called Clairvoyant, and so we set a group together and we brought in these investors, and they thought that they were going to be interviewing this entrepreneur, and it turns out, no, that an entrepreneur was going to interview every one of these investors and ask and see which one was actually the right one for her. And she found her investor. And 6 years later, Samsung bought the company, and it became the cornerstone for their first phone that they put into the market. We are tricking your eye into seeing even brighter colors, and it became the norm. But again, if she had just stopped at that point and said, oh, they don't get it, and this is disappointing, maybe I'll try something else, we wouldn't have had that technology all across all the phones now. That technology is being used. So it's very exciting for us to think about how we can be ambassadors. At the organization that I run, which is called Springboard Enterprises, our focus is to be the advocates, the cheerleaders for entrepreneurs who are, and very, very specifically, our lane is women transforming industries. So it's perfect to be here today because you're all entrepreneurs or in that field of supporting entrepreneurs who are transforming this particular industry, and it can use it. What we find in any sector that we work in is that it's like pushing rocks uphill. You have this great idea, you know that it has great potential, but maybe the market's not quite right. So another company that we've been working with for many years that actually started the whole idea of car sharing or sharing economy was a company called Zipcar. And many years ago, Robin Chase had been in Paris, and she had seen that people were sharing their cars. And she came back to the States and said, it's time to get cars off the road. It's time. You could certainly use it here. The congestion in Tel Aviv is outrageous, but in innovation and looking at new ways in which to think about our transportation system is really critical, and I think we're all very way behind. But in her vision, she said, there's got to be a way that we can do car sharing, and there are many reasons why people will adopt this. And the same exact thing happened. The investors said, we all have cars. Or we all can rent a car. Or we all can take a taxi. And she said, you're missing the point, that there is a movement coming on, and we can actually find a hybrid that allows people not to buy cars anymore, or not to buy the second or third car. And the pushback on that was incredible for about 4 or 5 years, until she found a solution, which was there were cities that were trying to manage their fleets, and they were losing cars. People were taking cars and they were going on holiday with them, and they were belonging to the municipality, the city, and they said, we can't manage our fleet of cars. Can you help us? And she said, yes, I'm going to validate my technology by allowing you to swipe something onto the windshield of the car in order to be able to use it. And then we can track the usage and where the cars are. Now, that seems like nothing right now. Like, of course, we can do that with everything. But 15 years ago, it wasn't. But to get the market to understand this and to engage on it and to decide that this was something that could change the way, and allow more people to have other options on transportation. And so it's very interesting for us how that story grew, and it started to become national, and there were many hurdles to making that happen. But ultimately, other people started to look at that model and figure out how they can improve on it. And so you had all kinds of other opportunities. I know you have, an ability to use apps for finding taxis here, but in the States, you can actually now go to some of the rural areas and use an Uber or a Lyft or some other innovative car-sharing app, or somehow find your neighbor's cars and rent those, in many different ways to figure out how do we democratize the whole way that people engage with their communities, with their neighbors, with their governments, and wherever. And it's very exciting to see how it's not just a few elite people that are starting this out, but that it's open to everybody. And Robin has gone on to be a tremendous thought leader in the area of transportation policy, and talks to cities and governments all over the world about how to think differently about their opportunities. And then jump forward a few years later, I received a note from a woman in Florida, and she said, I'm a biologist, and I have this very interesting opportunity to apply this new technology to farming. And we said, all right, well, we haven't really worked in this area of agriculture. Introduce us to the opportunity, and what do you need? And she said, well, what we do is we develop an interesting and novel nematode. And we all sat there and said, nematodes, this sounds absolutely awful. And she showed us pictures and brought in samples of the nematodes, and we said, aren't these the things that eat up all your roots and make it impossible for plants to grow? She goes, no, these are good nematodes. And she named a bunch of them, and so they all had names, and she put them in, and she was able to validate the fact that this actually added to the yield and And we said, okay, well, now we're informed about the fact that there are these wonderful positive bugs that are going to help in farming, and how can we spread the word about this? And you mentioned Bayer, and so Bayer Crop Solutions was interested in, called us up and said, if you find anything innovative in the world. And we said, oh, well, that's huge. And I said, what about nematodes? And they said, well, hadn't even thought about nematodes before, but we're happy to go down and see what she's doing. And ultimately, Bayer bought the company, and we learned a lot about that. And now we have 5 or 6 companies that, in some fashion, are looking at nematodes. And I can actually say I know what that is. And I don't always know what you're all doing, but what I am is somebody who wants to figure out how I can make a connect. We were talking before about community, and that innovation is a very, very personal experience. And what you're doing is very different from how somebody else is approaching their business. What we found also in the process of this is that women are different than men. Surprise. Better. Sometimes better, sometimes just different. And that it's what's interesting about it is that, we're wired a little differently. And it's not that the end result isn't the same or better. It's just that we think a little differently. And that's a good thing. But what we found is that in the process of trying to build your companies and get into the market and raise capital and go through all of that, you were following a pathway that wasn't comfortable or intuitive. And so very early on, we decided to take a different route and bring women together and learn a lot about them personally. Now, I will say this other thing that is very important is that we held constant for people who had the expertise and the ability to execute. So we weren't looking at aspirational entrepreneurs or people who thought it was a glamorous engagement. I don't know how many of you think entrepreneurship is glamorous, but I don't. I think it's the hardest thing you could ever do. And so we began to say, all right, let's see if we could help those companies that had this incredible ability to execute. And after a while, you begin to see a pattern recognition for the type of people who will do whatever it takes to take that mountain. Figure it out. Go in every different direction until they get to the end, or figure out how to have an impact. And so we said, what are the things that are obstacles to people who have that really high ability, top of the pyramid, as we say, but still find the obstacles? And what we found with women was this. At one of our early programs, and we've been around 20 years, so we've learned an awful lot about how people think and what's the best way to actually position people for success. And so we were sitting there and we said, okay, we're going to go right in. Let's everybody talk about your problem. Let's talk about your solution. Let's get on. And a woman raised her hand and said, can we stop for a minute? I have never been in a room where all my peers are women. And it was this moment of, we stopped for a second and we said, okay, let's think about that. What does that mean? Never been, we're all professionals, many of us have PhDs, we have never been in a room where all our peers are women, or even most of the people sitting in the room are women. So maybe we ought to spend a little time figuring out who we are. And I'll be honest with you, it doesn't matter where you live, where you were brought up, what you have learned, and that includes Israelis too, although you definitely have a jump on the rest of the world. It's very hard for women to talk about themselves. It's very hard for women to say what it is they have that is going to prove to somebody else that they're the ones to lead and exceed. And I'm telling you, after 20 years, it is the exact same wherever we go. Levels of difference. You go to Australia. How many of you have done business in Australia? It's an interesting environment where it doesn't matter men or women. They call it the tall poppy syndrome. And the minute you begin to sort of get above, and show your visibility, somebody comes along and lops off your head, or on top of the poppy. And so fighting against that inclination is very difficult. And for the women in Australia, it was even more difficult. And so we spend a lot of time getting to know each entrepreneur and her credentials and sharing that with the group. So in a community engagement, the most important thing is, so the people in the community support each other or somehow are connected to each other and know how to use those resources for their own purpose. So we started saying, okay, talk about yourself with relevance to the business. Now, I will tell you this. My husband has no problem talking about everything that he's ever done incredibly successfully and without any hesitation about how fabulous he is. Now, I married him, so he is fabulous, but he's not that fabulous. And so the interesting aspect of this is, how do you get people to a point where everybody in the room begins to see them as the leader, as the person that I want to follow, that I want to invest in, that I'm the one, who is going to help that company get somewhere because I'm going to bond with that CEO. You can't do it unless you know who they are. Entrepreneurship is very, very personal. And so over the years, our whole theory on supporting entrepreneurs has been about building community, connection to relevant resources, actionable takeaways that you can do something specific for your business, and then continually to build the network of people and expand horizons and connections far and wide, which is essentially why I'm here today. This is fertile ground, as you all say, for innovation. And what we have been doing is recruiting entrepreneurs for the last 20 years from Israel for our fashion tech programs, for our pharmaceutical programs, our digital health programs, our cybersecurity programs, and now I'm hoping for our Agtech programs. So I'm thrilled to be here. I can go on